in the UK. I can assure the Honourable Lady that my officials are working at pace with the Office of the Advocate General and other key UK Government departments to consider the issues around wrongful convictions.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Scotland, these prosecutions were carried out by the Crown Office and the Procurator Fiscal. Ministers in Crown were made aware of concerns around potentially unsafe prosecutions in 2013. Can the Minister tell the House why it took so long for the prosecutions to be halted and previous convictions to be reviewed?
Mr Speaker, the Horizon scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in this country's history, with hundreds of people having their lives ruined and reputations dragged through the mud. The Prime Minister has announced new laws that will be brought forward to make sure that those wrongly convicted are exonerated and swiftly compensated here in England. Now, as the Honourable Lady will know, administration of justice is a devolved matter, but the UK Government is in contact with the Scottish Government to explore the most effective way to exonerate and compensate those innocent people.
Shadow Minister Matthews.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I pass the thoughts of these benches to the Secretary of State at this difficult time and join him with his comments about all those affected by flooding as well. The scandal of the unjustified prosecution of sub-postmasters, the length and breadth of this country is almost beyond words. And although it shouldn't have taken a TV drama to get actions, it is good that those found guilty in England will now have their convictions quashed. But meanwhile, in Scotland, we're no clearer on how those wrongly convicted will get justice. The First Minister initially claimed he would be happy for this Parliament to legislate for every victim across the UK, but his Lord Advocate has then said that she doesn't support blanket exonerations. So, can I ask the Minister, what is he doing to ensure that those who were wrongly convicted in Scotland finally get the justice they deserve?
Mr Speaker, officials from the UK Government are working with their counterparts from the various devolved administrations, including the Scottish Government, to fully understand the legislative options that are available across the respective jurisdictions. I'd like to reassure the honourable member that it remains a priority for all concerned to ensure that those sub-postmasters receive justice and the compensation to which they are entitled as quickly as possible, irrespective of where they live in the United Kingdom.
Alexander Stafford.
Please, sir.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, oil and gas is and will remain a vital sector for the UK. The UK Government is committed to supporting this industry. That is why last week I attended the Grangemouth Future Industries Board with other UK and Scottish Government ministers on the transformation of the Grangemouth oil refinery. The introduction of the Offshore Petroleum Licensing Bill demonstrates our ongoing investment in this industry.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much, sir. My right honourable friend knows that Scotland has the potential to be one of the world's most advanced producers of hydrogen, and oil and gas companies play an important role in this transition. What is his department doing to support oil and gas companies who employ a huge number of people in Scotland and in my own seat of Rother Valley in building their hydrogen production, transmission and use capabilities to ramp up the production of hydrogen so we can get more of this low carbon energy we so need?
Minister.
Grateful to my honourable friend for that question. We anticipate that by 2030 the UK's growing hydrogen sector could support more than 12,000 jobs and unlock £11 billion worth in private investment. Our hydrogen production delivery roadmap sets out proposals for annual hydrogen allocation rounds from the year 2025 to 2030, helping to provide certainty for the industry. In December, we announced the results of hydrogen allocation round 1, with Scotland fielding 2 successful projects.
Mr Speaker, it's the renewable sector in Scotland providing the greatest job growth in Scotland's energy sector, with the number of jobs in the renewable sector in Scotland growing by more than 50% in 2021. And the future of Scotland's job security, energy and economy lies with renewables. So when will the UK Government finally match support for the Scottish Government's £500 million Just Transition Fund?
Mr Speaker, well, I mean, the SNP's position on energy, and particularly in relation to oil and gas, is frankly all over the place. We don't know where the First Minister of Scotland stands on this. He described developing Rosebank as the wrong decision, but now seems to think that oil reserves can fund capital investment in an independent Scotland. We fully recognise the importance of the energy sector to Scotland. That includes oil and gas, it includes renewables. I will continue to work with all parts of the energy sector to develop that for the Scottish economy.
Mr. Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government's funding for levelling up has now reached more than £2.9 billion. That's £2.9 billion, Mr Speaker, in Scotland. This includes almost £900 million of new funding announced last year. That's the equivalent of £535 per person in Scotland. The total is set to rise with millions of pounds of further investment in 2024.
Chris Law.
Mr Speaker, the Minister for Levelling Up will meet with me on Friday, but sadly this is not a courtesy that's been extended to the Leader of Dundee City Council, who's repeatedly invited the Minister to a round table instead to discuss funding critical to projects such as the Eden Project and the Life Sciences Innovation District, amongst others. I've sought to continue the long-term investment regeneration of the city through these projects in the Tay City regional deal, so can the Minister assure me that he will urge his colleague to include in these our discussions on Friday, and his dreadful lack of engagement is from a UK government that's committed to levelling up and not an outgoing government winding down?
Mr Speaker, the UK Government is investing more than £60 million in projects in Dundee, and these projects have been identified as key priorities by Dundee City Council and other local partners. Now, he mentions the leader of Dundee City Council. After receiving £20 million for Dundee from UK levelling up funds, the SNP leader of Dundee Council recently said, "This is just the UK Government element. I'm pursuing the Scottish Government as well, because we need both governments to work with us if we're to make significant economic inroads into the challenges we face." So, Mr Speaker, I hope the honourable member will now agree with me and agree to write a joint letter with me to his SNP colleagues in Holyrood asking, where's the money? Where's the money?
Now we come to SNP spokesperson Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of myself and my colleagues, I'd ask the Minister to convey our condolences also to the Secretary of State. Mr Speaker, we were given assurances prior to Brexit that the structural funds which provided capital funding for Scotland would be replaced by the specific levelling up and shared prosperity funding after Brexit. Can the Minister say how that funding now from those sources compares with what it was prior to leaving the EU?
Mr Speaker, 4 years since the United Kingdom left the EU, the UK Government has announced more than £1.4 billion for new levelling up initiatives across Scotland. This exceeds the entire 7-year budget for the EU structural and investment funds for Scotland for 2014 to 2020, roughly £780 million of funding. So do not accept the analysis that the honourable member presents.
Tommy Shepherd.
Well, no, it doesn't actually, Mr Speaker, because this government has a tendency to draw all sources of capital funding into its levelling up myth. I'm talking about the specific levelling up fund and the shared prosperity fund, and they have given Scotland £471 and £212 million respectively, and that is exactly £98 million short of the £780 million that came from the EU structural funds. So when can we have the money, please?
Exactly.
Mr Speaker, the honourable member is simply not correct. £2.9 billion has been invested by this government into the communities, the length and breadth of Scotland. I know SNP members opposite have fought tooth and nail to stop that investment being delivered to those local communities, but this government, this Conservative government, will continue to invest directly into Scotland.
Corinne Smith.
Mr Speaker, question 4.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, funding policies for those studying in Scotland, including nursing students, is a matter for the Scottish Government. The UK Government supports collaboration between our nations to share best practice and provide better healthcare services. We will be open to future discussions with the Scottish Government about this.
For that answer. My constituent has been denied additional funding for her nursing degree because she's domiciled in England but studying in Scotland, whereas those studying in England, regardless of where they're domiciled, can access this funding. So what advice can the Minister give me to help my constituent?
Mr Speaker, nursing bursaries for those wishing to study in Scotland are a matter for the Scottish Government. Unfortunately, the Scottish Government only provides bursary support for Scottish domiciled nursing students, and only if they're enrolled in a course that leads to a diploma in Scotland. In contrast, the UK Government ensures that the Learning Support Fund is available to all UK students studying at English universities, regardless of where they are domiciled. I'd be very happy, on behalf of the Honourable Lady, to set up a meeting with my colleagues in the Department for Health to see how we might be able to pursue this further.
Liz Chapman.
Number 5, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, and with your permission, I shall answer questions 5 and 12 together. Mr Speaker, the latest official figures speak for themselves. These show sustained increases in both the import and export of goods between Scotland and the EU, with healthy results for services too.
Mr Chapman.
Well, the Brexit pain continues, with £140 billion wiped off the UK economy, more regulation making it tough for exporters, and relatively to similar-sized countries, Scotland exports are under real pressure. Two themes in their First Minister's industrial strategy were to become an independent nation and to rejoin the EU. All the evidence points that that is the correct course of action, doesn't it?
No, it does not, Mr Speaker. Scotland continues to punch above its weight, both in exports and goods and services and foreign direct investment. Mr Speaker, trade is now well above pre-Brexit levels.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. According to the government's own figures, new Brexit controls will cost the UK £330 million. Wow. Now, businesses in Glasgow are telling me that they're already suffering from increased costs and red tape when they're importing parts and exporting goods. Can the Minister explain to businesses in my constituency of Glasgow North West how Brexit is good for them?
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady and the SNP really do have a brass neck speaking about business costs when it comes to their own policy of bringing a hard border at Berwick next to my own constituency. That would risk thousands of jobs and force thousands of companies out of business. It would be the most damaging and reckless economic step. We will work through any short-term issues, but the answer is not the long-term decline as proposed by the SNP.
Kerry McCarthy.
The former Right Honourable Member for Kingswood and Government Net Zero star said that what business... Sorry, 6. Yeah, sorry.
Mr Speaker, supporting economic growth in Scotland remains a core priority for the Scotland Office. We are focused on long-term economic growth, generating more jobs and boosting business investment. This is exemplified by investment of up to £372 million in the Scottish Freeport and Investment Zones programme. This is on top of our £1.5 billion worth of investment into growth deals across the whole of Scotland.
As I was saying, the former Right Honourable Member for Kingswood and Government Net Zero star said that what businesses and investors need from the government is certainty, clarity, consistency and continuity. Never has this been more true than in Scotland, where there is huge potential for businesses and communities to flourish as a result of the green transition. But they're not getting the certainty, clarity, consistency and continuity that they need from this government, are they?
Mr Speaker, I don't accept that analysis. The UK has a world-leading ambition to deploy up to 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, for example, with up to 5 gigawatts coming from floating offshore wind. Offshore wind provides secure, domestically generated electricity and will play a key role in decarbonising the UK power system by 2035, achieving net zero by 2050. So I do not share the Honourable Lady's analysis of this government's focus in this area.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister share my frustration that whilst his department's working to support the Scottish economy, the SNP is hitting it with higher taxes and not supporting vital sectors like hospitality and tourism in the way that's happening in England?
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Sadly, the SNP's sole focus seems to be independence, referendums and making Scotland the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. I can see this every day of the week in my own constituency as people are finding it increasingly difficult to justify remaining in Scotland when they're paying so much more tax compared to the rest of the UK but getting less good public services.
We now to Shadow Secretary of State Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I start by joining the Minister and passing on our condolences to the Secretary of State for the bereavement and his family. Can I also wish everyone a happy Burns Day for tomorrow and thank our wonderful Ayrshire musicians who are in the gallery who treated us to some entertainment last night. Mr Speaker, since this government has been in power, working people have paid on average 10 pence in the pound more in tax. The supposed party of low tax has created the highest tax burden on working people in 70 years and it makes this the biggest tax-raising parliament since records began. In Scotland, the SNP has looked at this tax burden and said, hold my beer, as everyone earning more than 28,000 pays even more tax than they do in England. What impact does the Minister think this historically high tax burden has on the Scottish economy?
Mr Speaker, well, this government remains focused on reducing the tax burden when it is prudent to do so. But as he identifies, in Scotland we have an additional challenge in terms of the high tax agenda being put forward by the Scottish Government, the SNP, and I share his concerns about the impact that is having on the ability of the Scottish economy to perform at its full potential.
Ian Murray.
Mr Speaker, the Minister seems to think that picking your pocket of £10 and giving you £2 back is something to be grateful for. The fact is that working people all across the country and in Scotland are paying for the Tories crashing the economy. Mr Speaker, we know that the Barnett formula results in an additional £19 billion of public spending into Scotland's economy. But last week, the national newspaper reported that the SNP was being encouraged by their sister party in Wales to join the campaign to ditch the funding formula. 16 years of SNP government has left Scotland's public finances with a £1 billion black hole. We're in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis in generations, yet historically high taxes are already being imposed on working people to pay for this. Losing the Barnett formula would devastate Scotland's public finances and the economy like nothing we've seen before. Will the Minister join me in demanding that the SNP rule out this policy to bin the Barnett formula?
Mr Speaker, the biggest enemy of the Barnett formula and the biggest enemy of devolution in Scotland is the SNP. They want to rip up the devolution settlement and they want to stop the Barnett formula, which results in millions of pounds of extra investment going into Scotland each year. This government, this party remains absolutely committed to devolution and that Barnett formula and more investment into Scotland.
Gregory Campbell.
Number 7.
Mr Speaker, the United Kingdom Government has taken action to make trade between Scotland and Northern Ireland easier. The UK Government is also committed to providing funding to deliver targeted improvements to the A75 road. This will provide better links between Cairn Ryan ferry terminals serving Northern Ireland and South West Scotland, benefiting businesses on both sides of the North Channel.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the reply the Minister has given us. He will understand, like many do, that the economic powerhouse of the United Kingdom is usually centred in the southeast of England and thus to the detriment of the southwest of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Will he do more to ensure that that small 12-mile stretch of water between Scotland and Northern Ireland is bridged in business terms by greater cooperation and expansion opportunities for people on either side of that 12-mile stretch?
Mr Speaker, the honourable member makes a very important point. I fully recognise the very strong links that exist between South West Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the potential to enhance those economic ties are great. Improved transport links are undoubtedly part of that with the A75 and ferry links. I look forward to working with him to see how we might be able to enhance and improve those links moving forward.
The Select Committee speak with Shaw.
Speaker, Scottish businesses would give their right arm to have the arrangements that Northern Irish businesses have with their access to the single market and all the competitive advantages that brings. The Prime Minister's described Northern Ireland as one of the world's most exciting economic zones. Does he agree with that? And what's he doing to ensure that Scotland gets the same arrangements?
Mr Speaker, well, I thought the honourable member was going to stand up to tell me how great the House of Lords was now, a bit like his honourable friend, the member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber, in a sort of preemptive job application. Mr Speaker, Scotland is not Northern Ireland and does not share the land border with an EU country. It's disappointing that the SNP is seeking to play party politics with the situation in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, as the SNP well knows, has a unique place in the United Kingdom, and we will protect that.
Alan Smith.
Number 8, sir.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government works tirelessly to promote Scottish interests around the world through our extensive diplomatic network, forging business links and generating trade and investments. Our response to the Scottish Affairs Committee's recent inquiry into Scotland's international position highlights the extensive efforts we undertake to achieve this.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm afraid I don't share the Minister's Panglossian view of this. Would you share my concern that recently published figures which show that in the years 2019 to 21, Scottish exports to the EU fell from 16.95 billion to 14.97 billion. Whatever the UK government's doing, it's not working. So the Scottish Government has a pressing need to promote ourselves overseas for our economy and our society. Would the Minister not agree that now's the time to increase that overseas promotion, not cut it back on domestic wrangles?
Mr Speaker, given the member's interest in this area, perhaps he could speak with his SNP colleagues in the Scottish Parliament. They are cutting funding to South of Scotland Enterprise, which will mean less support for businesses in the south of Scotland to grow, innovate and export. Perhaps he could tell the First Minister of Scotland that promoting Scotland overseas begins with supporting businesses at home in Scotland.
Jamie Stone.
Number 9, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government recognises the important job that all NHS workers do, including those in the ambulance service. I see this every day of the week in my own constituency in the Scottish Borders. The UK Government would be open to exploring with the Scottish Government how we can work together and share best practice to reduce ambulance waiting times in all parts of the United Kingdom.
Jamie Stone.
Mr Speaker, last year in Scotland, almost 3,000 people had to wait more than 8 hours for an ambulance. But in recent days, women who might have to travel a 2.5-hour drive to Rigmore Hospital in Inverness to give birth or for specialised treatment, they haven't been able to travel at all because the roads have been closed owing to the terrible weather we've had. Does the Minister share my deep anxiety for any woman who lives over 100 miles away from Rigmore Hospital?
Mr Speaker, I share the honourable member's concerns and I agree that these long distances are not acceptable, but it tells you all you need to know about the NHS in rural Scotland. NHS Highlands have said that it will need to substantially reduce spend following the SNP government's budget in December. The SNP government is taking a slash and burn approach to the rural NHS across Scotland.
Douglas Ross.
Pretend, sir.
Mr Speaker, the autumn statement supported families and set measures to grow the Scottish economy. With a stronger fiscal outlook, the Government has the space to cut taxes for hard-working people and businesses. This is highlighted by cuts to national insurance benefiting 2.4 million people in Scotland and the extension of full expensing, ensuring the UK has one of the most competitive business tax regimes in the world.
Order, order. Please, don't walk in front of members like that. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister is correct that the autumn statement from this UK Conservative government provided tax cuts for millions of Scots, provided support for businesses and invested to grow the economy. That was in stark contrast from the SNP's budget last month, which hiked taxes on hard-working Scots, failed to pass on the support to hospitality, retail and tourism sectors and has been widely criticised across Scotland. So does the Minister agree, as I do, with Sir Tom Hunter, who said at the weekend that the business community in Scotland doesn't believe the SNP has their back and that must change?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I agree with my honourable friend, and Sir Tom is right too. Traders in Scotland have accused the SNP government of undermining the rejuvenation of high streets across Scotland with their tax hikes of 6.7% through business rates. The SNP must stop attacking employers and high street traders who are already under tremendous financial strain because of the SNP's mismanagement of Scotland's economy.
Despite devolution rendering it pointless, the budget of the Scotland Office, along with that of the Attorney-General, has jumped by over £3 million since 2018-19, leaping up by £1.2 million just last year, while the Scottish Government's budget allocation suffered a real terms cut. Around 80 people currently work in Queen Elizabeth House alone for the Scotland Office, along with around 30 deluxe civil servants. What on earth are they doing, and how does he justify that to the Scottish taxpayer?
Mr Speaker, The team at the Scotland office, both in Dover House and in Queen Elizabeth House in Edinburgh, are doing a tremendous job supporting Scotland across the United Kingdom and around the world. I'd be very happy to welcome the Honourable Lady to join me to meet some of them so you can understand more clearly the important work that they do on our behalf across the UK.
That completes Scottish questions. We now come to the Prime Minister, but I just want to announce to the House we are joined today by the President of the Chamber of Deputies of Parliament of the Czech Republic. Welcome. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Richard Thompson.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I know that members from across the House will want to join me in offering our best wishes to His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House this afternoon, I shall be meeting the extraordinary 100-year-old Holocaust survivor, Lily Ebert. Lily promised that if she survived Auschwitz, she would tell the world the truth of what happened. Never has such a promise been so profoundly fulfilled. And as we prepare to mark Holocaust Memorial Day on Saturday, I'm sure the whole House will join me in reaffirming our promise to Lily that we will never forget the Holocaust and we will carry forward her life's work for generations to come.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I echo the Prime Minister's comments on World Holocaust Day? My constituents, like all of our constituents, rely on the Royal Mail to deliver important items of mail and packages and for people to run their businesses. So they'll be very alarmed to learn of proposals from Ofcom that Royal Mail might be allowed to cut the number of days that they might be able to, that they will provide that service. Can the Prime Minister give a commitment to me here today that under his watch there will be no reduction in postal services provided by the Royal Mail in Scotland or anywhere else?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree about the importance of the Royal Mail's universal service obligation, and as you will have heard from the Minister this morning, we remain absolutely committed to ensuring that it remains as it is.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Lib Dem-run council in Eastleigh has just received a report from their external auditors warning of the possibility of fraud and ignoring whistleblowers who try to warn them. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Lib Dem leaders who shun accountability, shun transparency and simply say "not me, Gov" should start showing some remorse and responsibility or make way for those who will?
Well,
We'll need the answer. Come on,
my honourable friend raises an important matter to the people of Eastleigh, which I was pleased to discuss with him on my recent visit to his area, and I know that the contents of the report are deeply concerning. It is disappointing to see this Liberal Democrat-run council rack up debt with absolutely no plan for how to fund it. And the council has been issued with a best value notice, and I know that he is talking to the Department of Levelling Up, who will be monitoring the situation closely.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, and in his comments about Holocaust Memorial Day? Never again must be said more defiantly this year, as it's said every year. Mr. Speaker, last week we lost Sir Tony Lloyd, a true public servant who touched the lives of many people across the House and across the country. And I'm glad that his family were here yesterday to hear the many tributes to and memories of Tony. He will be greatly missed. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's had quite a week, from endlessly fighting with his own MPs to collapsing in laughter when he was asked by a member of the public about NHS waiting lists. So I was glad to hear that he managed to take some time off.
Can I just say, I wanted to the Prime Minister, I'm certainly going to hear the Leader of the Opposition. Those people who don't want to hear, they can certainly leave, because that's who it's going to be, so get it in order. Some of you are wanting to catch my eye again. It's not a good way to do it.
Mr. Speaker, I love this quaint tradition where the more they slag him off behind his back, the louder they cheer in here. Keep it going.
And also, for this side, you can have a joint cup of tea. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, I was glad to see that he managed to get some time off yesterday afternoon to kick back, relax and accidentally record a candid video for Nigel Farage. The only thing missing from that punishing schedule is any sort of governing or leadership. So was he surprised to see one of his own MPs say that he doesn't get what Britain needs and he's not listening to what people want?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about what Britain needs, what Britain wants, what Britain values. This from a man who takes the knee, Mr. Speaker, who wanted to abolish the monarchy, who still doesn't know what a woman is, and who just this week, one of his front benchers said that they back teaching divisive white privilege in our schools, Mr. Speaker. Looking at his record, it's crystal clear which one of us doesn't get Britain's values.
Mr. Speaker, he spouts so much nonsense, no wonder they're giving up on him. And even now, as his government crumbles around him and his own MPs point out he's out of touch, got no plan for growth, crime or building houses, the Prime Minister is sticking to his one-man Pollyanna show. Everything's fine. People should be grateful to him. The trouble is, no one's buying it. Does he actually understand why his own MPs say he doesn't understand Britain and that he is an obstacle to recovery?
Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, he calls it nonsense, but these are his positions, Mr. Speaker. Right? And he doesn't want to talk about it, but this is the facts. He chose to represent a now proscribed terrorist group, Mr. Speaker. He chose to campaign against the deportation of foreign national offenders, Mr. Speaker, just like he chose to serve the Right Honourable Member for Islington North, Mr. Speaker. That's his record, those are his values, and that is exactly how he should be judged.
Mr. Speaker, in 2008, I was the Director of Public Prosecution, putting terrorists and murderers in jail. He was making millions betting on the misery of working people during the financial crisis. And we've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos, the longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film. Meanwhile, this week we discover that Britain is going to be the only major economy that no longer makes its own steel. That the government is handing out £500 million to make 3,000 steelworkers redundant. And that the parents of thousands are being told that his free childcare promise is nothing but a mirage. Isn't he embarrassed that the Tory party is yet again entirely focused on itself?
Mr. Speaker, yet more sniping from the sidelines. Yeah, you can see exactly why Hizbut Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Rain has said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air, and just sees which way the wind is blowing. Even Labour Party know, Mr. Speaker, he's not a leader, he is a human weather vane.
It's not the sidelines, it's behind him that the fire's coming in, Mr. Speaker. And he can try and blame the Labour Party all he wants. The difference is, I've changed my party, he's bullied by his party. And has he found the time in his busy schedule to work out why thousands of parents are being told by their nurseries that they won't get free childcare that he promised them?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's see what his party is offering the country. Right, so we all know, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have many ideas for our country.
I'm going to hear the Prime Minister.
Well, he doesn't have many, but one thing we do know, Mr. Speaker, is that...
You don't want to push it, do you? No.
Do you know that he's committed to his 2030 decarbonisation promise, Mr. Speaker, which they say will cost £28 billion? But I was reading about it this week. He says he's changed the party. One of his team called it an albatross hanging around their neck. That might have been the Shadow Chancellor, maybe, Mr. Speaker. But he said they're doubling down on it. All this ahead of a crunch meeting, we're told this week, for them to work out how they're going to pay for it. I can save them some time because we all know the answer. Higher taxes for the British people.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one party that crashed the economy. They're sitting right there, right there. And
Oh, Mr. Holmes, you've had your question already. Obviously, you don't want to remain for the rest of it. Yes, Salma.
He is Mr. 25 tax rises. And he's got nothing to say on childcare. Millions of families will have been listening for an answer, and they got absolutely nothing. He announced that scheme a year ago, claiming it would get 60,000 parents back into work. Only on Monday of this week did he notice there was some, in his words, practical issues with that. 8 weeks before its launch, parents can't budget, plan for work or make arrangements with their employers. And the Prime Minister's response is to say it's all fine, it's the fault of the Labour Party. Is this merely a practical issue, or is it yet another example of him simply not understanding how life works for other people?
Mr. Speaker, we're delivering the biggest ever expansion of childcare in this country's history, Mr. Speaker. But while millions of parents will benefit from that, again, it's right that he should come clean with them about the cost that his plans will impose on all of them. He goes on and on about the Green Promise, Mr. Speaker. He says he wants to keep it. But he doesn't have a plan to pay for it. What he's really saying is he'll scrap the borrowing associated, but he wants to keep the £28 billion of spending. So, for all those working families who are benefiting from our free childcare, he should come clean with them now. Why doesn't he come clean with them now? Come clean with them now and just be clear. His plans mean back to square one and higher taxes for British people.
Mr. Speaker, making steelworkers redundant and failing to provide childcare is not a plan, Prime Minister. It's a farce. It's a farce. And he may soon discover that with childcare, there's an IT problem. Nurseries haven't got the spaces. They haven't got the staff. There's a black hole in their budget, and it's 8 weeks to go. That isn't a plan. And families across the country, well, they can laugh all they like. Families are making plans now. They laugh at it, of course they do. Families are struggling with a cost of living crisis, trying to work out the household budget, balancing spiralling mortgages, prices and eye-watering bills. And then at the last minute, they're thrown into chaos because their nursery says they can't deliver the free childcare he promised. Now, he calls that a practical issue. But I preferred the honesty of whichever of his colleagues briefed to the Times that it was, and I quote, a complete shit show. Who was it who briefed that to the Times? Hands up. Will the Prime Minister finally realise...
I'll decide how long the question goes. Those who wish don't hear it, I've told you the answer, and I'll help you on the way.
When will the Prime Minister finally realise that the biggest practical issue facing Britain is the constant farcical incompetence of the government that he leads?
Mr. Speaker, another week with no ideas, absolutely no ideas as country, and absolutely no plan. He talked about the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, he talked about the economy, but he never actually brings it up, and we all know why, Mr. Speaker, because things are improving and we are making progress. Wages now rising, Mr. Speaker, debt on track to be reduced, and inflation more than halved from 11% to 4%, because he actually knows that our plan is working and that his £28 billion tax grab will take Britain back to square one. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the choice. It's back to square one and higher taxes with him, or a plan that's delivering a brighter future with the Conservatives.
Change of gear, Mr. Speaker. Too many oligarchs and kleptocrats are living off ill-gotten gains beyond the reach of domestic courts here or in countries like America. Ever since the 2016 London Anti-Corruption Summit, moves to create an international anti-corruption court have been gathering momentum to plug this gap. It already has support from countries like Canada, Holland and Nigeria, and would fund itself from the fines it charged. Will this government take the lead in getting it underway, ending impunity for these crooks once and for all?
Well, can I firstly pay tribute to my honourable friend for his work on this issue? As I'm sure he'll appreciate, establishing a new bespoke institution is a significant endeavour, but I know he's discussed it with the Foreign Secretary, who will look at the proposals in more detail. And in the meantime, as he knows, our Economic Crime Act has a raft of new measures to crack down on dirty money, and we will shortly be publishing our second anti-corruption strategy. Will set out ambitious plans for combating corruption, both here at home, but also internationally.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, last night, as Tory MPs were once again fighting amongst themselves, the public were sat at home watching John Irvine of ITV News report on footage from Gaza of an unarmed Palestinian man walking under a white flag, being shot and killed by the IDF. Prime Minister, such an act constitutes a war crime, does it not?
Mr. Speaker, we've been absolutely consistent that international humanitarian law should be respected and civilians should be protected. I've made that point expressly to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the Foreign Secretary is in the region this week making exactly the same point.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to rise to that dispatch box and tell the people of these Isles and elsewhere that shooting an unarmed man walking under a white flag is a war crime. Now, in recent weeks, this House has acted with urgency and intent following an ITV drama. The question is, will this House now show the same urgency and intent following this ITV news report? And finally, back a ceasefire in Gaza.
Mr. Speaker, no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary, and we do want to see an immediate and sustained humanitarian pause to get more aid in and, crucially, the hostages out, helping create the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire. I set out the conditions for that earlier in the House. The Foreign Secretary is in the region today, and will continue to press all our allies and partners to make sure that we can bring about that outcome.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, access to NHS dentistry is a key issue in Ipswich and Suffolk. Locally, actually, we've done something about it, and the University of Suffolk and the local NHS deserve great credit for establishing a new dental centre which is going to carry 18,000 hours a year of NHS dental appointments. However, a source of great frustration for myself and a number of constituents is that many people who train to be a dentist at university for 5 years and have their training heavily subsidised can immediately go private or actually go abroad without giving anything back to the NHS. It seems wrong to me. Would the Prime Minister support the view of many of my constituents that for say 5 years they work in the NHS, they give something back, and this will make a huge contribution to this problem?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for better dental access in his constituency, and I congratulate him on the new dental centre that's opening, which I know he worked very hard to deliver. And I agree with him. It's right and fair that we seek better value for the significant investment that the taxpayer makes in the education and training of the dental workforce. That's why, as our workforce plan outlined, we are exploring whether a tie-in would ensure that dentists spend a better proportion of their time in the NHS, and we'll be launching a consultation on this policy later this year.
Colm Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the week of the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, people in Derry are watching unarmed Palestinians being gunned down by Israeli soldiers. Over 25,000 people have now been slaughtered in Gaza. The Prime Minister says, and he said it again today, that he wants to see a sustained ceasefire. So my question is a very, very simple one. The next time there's a vote at the UN for a ceasefire, will his representative vote for it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we'll engage with all UN resolutions on their merits, and I've been clear no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than is necessary. We do want to see an immediate pause so we can get aid in and hostages out, because the situation is desperate for many people there. But a sustainable, permanent ceasefire needs to fulfill a set of conditions, including Hamas releasing all of the hostages, Hamas no longer being in charge of Gaza with the threat of rocket attacks into Israel, and an agreement in place for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza to provide governance and services. The Foreign Secretaries in the region, those are the principles on which we are working, and I believe those are shared by all our major allies.
Sure.
In 1859, Brunel opened his rail bridge over the River Tamar. In 2022, I met with Network Rail and others to celebrate the agreement to build a simple footbridge going over the railway line in Lostwithiel. That bridge still doesn't exist, and I have no completion date. Can my right honourable friend help?
Well, I know that my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for the footbridge at Lostwithiel station, and I recognise her concerns and the pressing need for the construction of this footbridge. I'm told that Network Rail is currently working on a funding solution for this, so that it can take forward this important project in the next financial year, and the Rail Minister will keep my honourable friend updated on his progress.
Ms. Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A report released yesterday by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation found that 1 in 4 people in the North East are living in poverty, with the child poverty rate for every local authority in the region higher than the UK average. Too many of our people are being hard hit. Now, the Prime Minister says that his plan is beginning to work. So can I ask the Prime Minister, where does rising child poverty fit in his plan?
Well, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the plan is working because poverty is falling in our country. Since 2010, there are 1.7 million fewer people in poverty, including hundreds of thousands of children. Of course, there's more to do. There's always more to do to make sure children don't grow up in poverty, but that absolutely wouldn't be helped by Labour's £28 billion tax grab on their parents, which would take money out of their families' bank accounts.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, Bracknell Forest is a place of aspiration, opportunity and enterprise. Business occupancy rates and employment figures are thankfully high. Footfall at the Lexicon Shopping Centre is up and wages are up, but the cost of living continues to bite across the UK. What more can be done to put more money in people's pockets?
Well, it's great to see, thanks to my honourable friend, that Bracknell Forest is thriving, with people in work up, footfall in the town centre up, and as he knows, almost 100% of his schools now good or outstanding. But he's right that we must do more to relieve the burden on working people, Mr. Speaker, which is why we cut taxes for tens of millions of people in work earlier this year, worth on average £450. And we've got to stick to the plan for lower taxes, a strong economy, and a brighter future for the people of Bracknell Forest, and absolutely not risk going back to square one with the Labour Party.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, if everyone had the same good health as the least deprived 10% of the population, in England there would have been a million fewer deaths between 2012 and 2019, and 28,000 fewer deaths in the first year of COVID. These inequalities are not inevitable. Does the Prime Minister think that cuts in social security to 85,000 low-income households, including people in low-paid work in my constituency, will help or to address these health inequalities?
Well, I can assure the Honourable Lady that we are committed to caring for society's most vulnerable, and that's why almost 20 million families will see their benefit payments increase this April, which will bring our total support over these few years to around £3,700 per UK household. The Department for Work and Pensions is looking very closely at how it can target its services precisely on the most vulnerable customers, and I know the Honourable Lady spoke to the DWP Permanent Secretary at length about this when he appeared before this Select Committee earlier this month, and I can assure her that he will be writing to the committee on exactly this subject shortly.
Jonathan Lord.
The post office scandal has affected so many people, including my constituent, Seema Misra, a sub-postmaster from West Byfleet with an outstanding record of service to her community, who was wrongfully convicted in 2010 of stealing £75,000 and was sentenced to prison on her first son's birthday and whilst pregnant with her second son. Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and more importantly with Seema Misra herself, who is in the gallery today with her husband Devinder, that she is due a full apology from the Post Office, a full apology from Fujitsu, and proper compensation as a matter of urgency?
And I know my honourable friend has been a great support to his constituents over all the years and has fought relentlessly for the truth to come out. As I've said, the Horizon scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. We will introduce, as I said a few weeks ago, primary legislation within weeks to ensure that all convictions that were based on erroneous Horizon evidence are quashed, that will clear people's names, deliver justice and ensure swifter access to compensation. Innocent people, like my honourable friend's constituents, have waited far too long, and I'm determined that they receive compensation as swiftly as possible. We have a clear moral duty to right these wrongs, and that is exactly what we will do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2021, 3,527 food parcels were given out by Bulwell and Bestwood Food Bank. Last year, that number exploded to 6,500, with nearly half going to children. The food bank's now having to buy food to supplement donations, which can only be sustained for a short period. Rather than pretending that things are getting better, will the Prime Minister apologise for the daily chaos in government, which is leaving widespread destitution unaddressed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to see anyone reliant on food banks, but while they're in place, I have nothing but praise and thanks for the people who run them. But it is wrong to say that we aren't making progress. When I came into this job, inflation was running at 11%. That is the single biggest impact on families' cost of living. And now, thanks to the efforts of this government, most of them opposed by his party, inflation has now been more than halved at 4%. And we're combining that with significant tax cuts to put more money in people's bank accounts at the end of every month. That's the right way to go about supporting people, combined with our extensive cost of living support for the most vulnerable. And all the statistics show that that support has helped, has made a difference, and that's what you get with responsible management of the British economy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In November, I held an adjournment debate on the South Fylde line and the need for a passing loop to double its hourly service and increase resilience against delays and cancellations, which again caused misery for travellers over Christmas. The assurances I received from the Rail Minister built on the positivity generated by the reallocation of HS2 funds. Since then, progress has been desperately slow, and my efforts to advance this critical piece of infrastructure for the people of Fylde has been frustrated. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how the government can help to get the South Fylde line back on track?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is correct that local transport projects are and must be prioritised, and every region of our country will have more transport investment as a result of the decision that we made on HS2. Now, work is underway to consider potential upgrades to the West Coast Main Line, including improvements at Preston Station, which may support additional local services from South Fylde. I know the Rail Minister is carefully considering these options as we speak, and will update my honourable friend in due course.
Leila Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thames Water are a shambles. In the recent flooding in Oxfordshire, they were dumping sewage from 270 sites along the Thames in 1 week. There was waste backing up into people's homes because of drains that they had not unblocked, and they couldn't even refill their own reservoir because the rivers were too dirty. But rather than offer a rebate for this shoddy service, they are intending to put bills up for everyone by 60%. So will the Prime Minister explain to my constituents why they are being asked to foot the bill for Thames Water's gross incompetence?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've been clear that the volume of sewage discharged by water companies is unacceptable, and that's why we've launched the most ambitious storm overflow discharge reduction plan. And we have now achieved monitoring of almost every single storm overflow in England under this and previous governments, and have introduced unlimited penalties on water companies. And where there is evidence of poor performance, the Environment Agency will not hesitate to pursue water companies concerned, just as they did, I believe, a couple of years ago in the Honourable Lady's constituency, where they fined Thames Water specifically £4 million following a serious incident.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Honourable Member for Knowsley and I published our report on TIDE, Type 1 Diabetes and Disordered Eating, a condition estimated to affect over a quarter of type 1 diabetics in the UK. It is life-shortening, life-threatening, and can lead to death. I'm pleased to say that Hampshire Integrated Care Board have already responded positively to the report. Will my right honourable friend ensure that the government not only looks seriously at the recommendations we have put forward, but acts on those recommendations, which would improve lives, and save money for the NHS?
Can I start by thanking my right honourable friend and indeed the right honourable member for Knowsley for their important work on this issue. Of course, I know both of them speak from personal experience, and as she says, it is important that people get the treatment they need. The Health Secretary will, of course, consider the report, and the NHS has already been piloting services to support those with this condition, as she's aware of, and I understand that the NHS is also now expanding pilot sites to every region of the country so that even more people can benefit from the appropriate integrated care.
Adam Kaiser.
Mr. Speaker, we entered 2024 with starvation and famine as acute as ever across the globe, much of it caused by the climate crisis. Yet at present, the world's worst hunger crisis is in Gaza, created by Israel's ongoing siege. The Integrated Food Security Phase classification has found that out of 600,000 people facing starvation globally, 95% of them are in Gaza. Mr. Speaker, starvation used as a weapon of war is a war crime. The Israeli government has the power to end the starvation crisis by ending the siege of Gaza and opening all crossings. Does it not, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I've been absolutely clear that we are incredibly concerned about the devastating impact of the situation in Gaza on citizens. That's why we have tripled our humanitarian aid for this financial year to the region. And, as I said in the statement yesterday, are working with partners such as Jordan and the United States to open up new aid corridors so we can increase the supply of aid getting in to those who desperately need it.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the press reported the tragic case of a 14-year-old girl who took her own life following horrific social media bullying, including on TikTok and Snapchat. Since 2010, across the English-speaking world, there's been a marked increase in poor teen mental health, teen suicide attempts, and children addicted to pornography. The United Kingdom has a strong tradition of legislating to protect children from serious threats to their safety and welfare. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's time to consider banning social media and perhaps even smartphones for under 16s?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the impact of what happens online on our children, and that's why our Online Safety Act tackles both criminal activity online and protects children from harmful or inappropriate content such as bullying or the promotion of self-harm, accessing pornography and also exposure to eating disorders. Ofcom are now rightly developing and consulting on the guidance and the codes of practices for how those platforms will meet their duties, and if they don't clean up their act, then Ofcom will be able to impose fines of up to 10% of global turnover on the social media firms.
Mr. Speaker, recently released documents reveal that the Foreign Office had serious concerns about Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law and its ongoing assault on Gaza. This assessment was hidden from Parliament, whilst the Prime Minister boldly stated his confidence in Israel's respect for international law. Since then, the scale of Israel's war crimes in Gaza have been revealed to the world thanks to South Africa's case to the ICJ. Therefore, is it now not the time for the Prime Minister to admit that he has the blood of thousands of innocent people on his hands, and for him to commit to demanding an immediate ceasefire and an ending of UK's arms trade with Israel?
Mr. Speaker, that's the face of the changed Labour Party.
Educational Trust exhibition in Portcullis House and for your personal unwavering commitment to Holocaust remembrance.
Mr Speaker, as we approach Holocaust Memorial Day, will the Prime Minister join me in commending the important work of the Holocaust Educational Trust, in particular their work with Holocaust survivors, who, despite living through the darkest moment in human history, continue to share their testimony in the hope of ensuring never again. In the face of the appalling rise in anti-Semitism which we see on the streets of Britain, will my right honourable friend join me in encouraging all members to sign the Book of Commitment and stand up against anti-Semitism?
Mr Speaker, I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the brilliant work of the Holocaust Educational Trust and thank her for all her work on this issue. I'll be signing the Book of Commitment this afternoon during my meeting with Lily Ebbett, and I encourage members on all sides to do the same and to reaffirm with shared determination to ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten and to defeat the resurgence of anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred in our country.
Final question, Sarah Champion.
Mr Speaker, I represent a proud steel community in Rotherham who stand with the steel workers in Port Talbot at this very worrying time. My constituents don't want to see their taxpayers' money used to make British workers redundant, our primary steel-making capacity decimated and our national security compromised. So will the Prime Minister change his destructive course, starting by looking at the credible multi-union plan to safeguard our steel industry's long-term future?
Mr Speaker, I know this is an anxious time for steel workers in South Wales, but we are committed to working with the steel sector to secure a positive and sustainable future. The Honourable Lady will know that during the pandemic we provided support to Celsa, a steel company in South Wales, to safeguard jobs and ensure the sustainability of that plant. And what was proposed to happen in South Wales was the loss of 8,000 direct jobs, thousands more across the supply chain, and the complete closure of the plant. Because of the government's investment and support and partnership with Tata, we have safeguarded 5,000 direct jobs, thousands more in the supply chain, and ensured the long-term sustainability of that steel plant so it has a brighter future. Obviously, this is difficult, but it's entirely churlish of her not to recognise the largest support package. It is one of the largest support packages that any government has provided any company, and in the process safeguarded thousands of jobs.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Please let the chamber clear.
Quietly, please.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. To ask the Minister if he'll make a statement on resilience in light of recent extreme weather events, including Storm Isha and